Mr. Schlereth, you were very optimistic last week when we spoke to you about the Patriots. You said hammer the over 8.5 wins. They went out and had a disappointing loss on Sunday to the Raiders. What was your reaction to that? Are you reassessing your predictions?
Oh yeah, you always reassess your predictions, but I mean, I think it's a little early to panic right now. I mean, ultimately, when I think of Mike Vrabel football, I think about shutting down the run, right? I think about physicality. I think about winning the line of scrimmage. And, you think about what the Raiders are all about under Pete Carroll. They want to run the ball. They went out and got Genty from Boston College, and they shut that aspect of it down. But when you flip the script and you go to the offensive side of the ball, that's what I don't understand. I don't understand how your starting running back is getting 5 yards per carry and he's just getting a handful of carries. Like that doesn't necessarily run with the script. And sometimes, that's the way teams play you. Part and parcel of today's NFL that drives me crazy a little bit is how much can it kind of stuff you have in an offense. So, for instance, you'll say, hey, man, we're going to run this run. Let's call it 18 handoff, and we're going to can that with some pass play, right? And then a defense can basically get to you to basically say you're not going to run the ball, or we're going to bring our safety down, or whatever the case may be, whatever your checks are, and it forces you to get out of balance. You start throwing the ball too much. And that's always a concern, to where all of a sudden you'll look at, a quarter and a half gone by and you go, man, we threw the ball 16 times and we ran it 3 times. And so sometimes you either have to have what we call on offense tank plays. I just call it run it plays. Like, this play is good against everything. Like, handoff force is good against everything. Let's run it. Or you're going to go check to check, like run to run checks as opposed to run to pass checks. So something, and again, I don't have the game plan in front of me and I don't know, but those things are always things that concern me when you're that far out of balance.
So, Mark, quick question, just overall, keep it simple. What, after in a disappointing loss to a Raiders team that definitely looked very well prepared on Sunday in semi-inclement conditions, what would be your biggest concern taken away from the way the Patriots played?
Well, I would say number one is just the lack of offensive balance. You've got a second-year QB. To me, you've got to be balanced, and that's the thing that shocked me a little bit, because, when you have coached, or when you have watched Mike Vrabel, and when you have called one of his games, I mean, it's always about controlling the line of scrimmage. He always talks to me about controlling the line of scrimmage, being tough, being physical, doing those things. And you just can't do that if you sit back and you throw it 50 times or 48, whatever their total was. I know it was a bunch, but like, you just watch it. It just makes it really hard to play up front, and then it makes it really hard when you decide all of a sudden, okay, we got to get back in balance. Well, you've had no reps. You've had no real feel for the game, and your backs haven't had it. Your offensive line hasn't had it. All those things. So it just becomes one of those deals where it's really hard to overcome. So that shocked me about this particular game plan. So we'll see how the adjustments go going forward. But here's the good news. Like, if you watched a lot of NFL football this weekend like I did, there were a lot of really poorly, I'm not going to call it coached, but poorly executed offenses. And I think that's part and parcel of today's NFL, is the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season are kind of a quote-unquote extension of the preseason, and there's just a lot of room for improvement. So that's the good takeaway, is that a lot of teams didn't play well, and a lot of teams cost themselves opportunity because of lack of execution.
Insider calls are brought to you by Nationwide. For your insurance and financial needs, Nationwide is on your side. Mark, one of the questions that has sort of popped up this week, and Vrabel didn't shoot it down, was, is there too much on the plate of Drake Maye? Josh McDaniels bringing his scheme in. Obviously, he worked for years with Tom Brady, and there's an extensive, difficult scheme there. Have you ever been around a quarterback, young or old, that you felt maybe they lost their playing confidence because there was just too much put on their plate?
Well, I mean, just as an offensive player, that stuff used to drive me crazy. And, there's a place for in today's NFL, for all the, hey, we want to run I get this all the time with coordinators, we want to run the perfect play versus the perfect scheme, so we want to run this play against cover 3. If we get a too high safety look, we're going to, we want to change it to this. Well, like, I get the principle of that, but sometimes what that does is gets you to play soft, gets you to play with hesitation without anticipation. And if you don't play with anticipation, like Anthony Campanelli said this to me, he's the defensive coordinator of the Jacksonville Jaguars. He goes, if you don't play with anticipation, you're going to play with anxiety. You one or the other. And so when you've got too much on your mind, it creates anxiety. It creates less of an aggressive nature. And, throughout the course of my career, when we started getting too cute, it used to drive me crazy. Let's just line up and let's play a little smash mouth. Let's just line up, keep it simple, stupid, and let's go. And ultimately, sometimes you're in such a chase of perfection that you end up making your players play slow. And that's always, there's a fine line between being able to execute and being able to take advantage of that stuff. And then, and having that kind of quote unquote perfect play dialed up based on the defense that you thought you were going to get, and then making your players play slow because there's too much paralysis by analysis. And that's something you got to really look at, you got to dig into, and you got to know your team, know your players, and then have a great sense of, are we doing too much and taking away some of the aggressiveness of our players.
So those who don't play with anticipation play with anxiety. That is officially going on a T-shirt and on a billboard here in the studios of WEEI Afternoons. Stink, good stuff. We're listening. All right. We're talking with the host of the Stinkin' Truth podcast, Odyssey National Insider Mark Schlereth here on WEEI Afternoons. There's a development. Jabril Peppers is supposed to be signing with the Pittsburgh Steelers now. And he was kind of a fan favorite, big heavy hitter with the Patriots for a couple of years. And my co-host here made a point earlier that the Patriots may be a little too married to scheme and not talent, perhaps, which kind of ties into a lot of what you were saying. How is it that a guy like Jabril Peppers, who still seems like he has a lot of game left in him, wouldn't be a fit with a team like the Patriots, but he's a perfect fit for Pittsburgh?
Yeah, again, I don't know what went down there. Obviously, it felt like something went down, right? Something behind the scenes happened that they weren't real happy with. I don't know. Jabril is one of those guys over the course of his career is probably been described as a little bit of a liability in coverage, but is a guy that will run down there and support and and trade paint. So like it's one of those situations. You got to put them in the right position. You got to do those things. And in today's NFL, where they play so much shell coverage, they want dudes that can rock and roll from there. They can have great coverage skills. They want those guys to be, both those guys that are playing safety to be dual players. Like they want to be able to be middle of the field guys that can protect the middle of the field, that can erase mistakes in the middle of the field in coverage, but also trigger when the tight end blocks down and be that alley fill player and meet you on the line of scrimmage. And, if you feel like, hey, Jabril can do that second part, but he can't really be a middle of the field, eraser, he can't really cover in the middle of the field, then you get into, well, can we really play this defense if teams can make us make him the single high safety in certain situations, the way they run their offense. So I think there's a lot of things that they come into play with something like that. And that would be my assessment. I'm not there, so I don't know. But my first inclination is he pissed somebody off. That was my first inclination.
Mark, obviously Drake Maye is not the only second-year quarterback sort of in the analytical crosshairs. Hell, we had a matchup last night between two of them on Monday Night Football. And that leads me to a question that we talk about the it factor in a lot of sports, but certainly at the quarterback position. And last night's game was an interesting one where J.J. McCarthy was sort of pedestrian or maybe not even that good for 3 quarters, and then he turns it on in the fourth quarter of his first NFL start on the road, and it's like all of a sudden he has that it game that Viking fans are going to get excited about. Do you believe there is a quote-unquote it factor to playing the quarterback position?
I believe there's an it factor to playing every position. Like people will ask you, like, "Hey, what is it that makes like this guy a Hall of Famer?" How do you? I don't know, but I can tell it when I watch it. Like I can tell it when a guy has it. I don't know what makes you a Hall of Famer, but you can watch it on film and go, "Oh, shoot, that guy is different." I don't know if you watch the Packers, but watching Micah Parsons come off the edge, whatever the mixture was, it was right because that dude was flying. And I know he wasn't playing full time, but like that was a difference maker. And I just think all the time, like to have the kind of game you were having where it was terrible, like it was not good, and then all of a sudden, you look at what's the kid's name, Jordan Mason came in, started ripping off runs. Then all of a sudden, you got some play action ability, some play pass stuff. Then your connection with Justin Jefferson, all of a sudden you got that. You hit, the running back Jones down the rail for a touchdown, and the next thing you know, you're flying. Like everybody's got confidence, and you've got confidence all of a sudden. But to be able to have that bad of a game, and then to still to be able to stay in is impressive. It's really impressive. It's really funny. You always kind of reference your own career. And, I was a stickler I just didn't make mistakes. Like I didn't have mental assignment mistakes. Every now and again you're going to get your ass kicked and that happens, but I didn't have missed assignments because I just was one of those dudes. If I made one mistake, I was going to make two or three more because I would just beat myself up so bad. I always say I was just too much of a mental midget to play quarterback because I can't let things go. If I make a mistake, man, I'm going to walk back to the huddle with it. I can't just go, oh, well, you know what? So say la vie, it happened. Let's move on. I beat myself up over that stuff. So for him to have the kind of lack of presence that he had through three quarters, and then he did something that nobody in the history of the National Football League has done. He threw 3 touchdown passes in the fourth quarter, brought his team back. I think it was from a double deficit, not loss, but behind from a double deficit score, and won a game in his debut. Nobody has ever done that in the history of the NFL. And so to be able to do that after, like you guys said, being pedestrian through three quarters is flat out impressive, if you ask me.
Real quick as we bump out, Mark, who would you say most impressed you league-wide, just stepping outside the bounds of New England for a sec? Who impressed you? What team impressed you most overall in the NFL Sunday, Week 1?
Well, that 4-minute comeback from Buffalo was incredible. But again, it's the Ravens kind of forgetting, quote-unquote, who they are. I thought the Packers, especially in that first half, Jordan Love was awesome. The young wide receivers looked great. Their protection, they just stonewalled the Detroit Lions. I thought they looked they to me were one of the most impressive teams in football this weekend.
All right, Mark, appreciate you joining us. Look forward to chatting with you next week. We'll see if the Patriots can bounce back in Miami.